I want to bring on and introduce Christine from Galaxy to talk about the Ethereum governance process in a nutshell. A lot of you have kind of asked us questions about how does the protocol get better? What do the devs talk about? What is a core dev? How do we vote on things? What Zoom meeting do I need to join? All those questions that we usually get. Most of them will be answered today. And doing that will be Christine, so please give her a massive round of applause.
Hello. Thank you so much for the introduction. I'm really excited to be here and talking to you guys about Ethereum governance. A quick disclaimer before I start the presentation. All of what I'm about to say is just for informational purposes, not for investment advice or legal advice or anything like that. Yes, so the agenda today is that I'm going to be talking about the people involved in Ethereum's governance, the forums on which these decisions are made, prior upgrades in Ethereum's history, and some ones upcoming like Cancun-Deneb, Prague-Electra. We'll see how much content we can get through before this half hour is up. And to start, I really want to begin this discussion by talking about the Bitcoin governance triumvirate. Because if this is a topic that you're interested in, which I hope if you're not already by the end of this presentation you will be, this is a very kind of infamous diagram, infamous image that has shaped the discourse around governance of decentralized permissionless protocols. So on Bitcoin, the governance of Ethereum, the way that the Bitcoin protocol is upgraded, is primarily governed by these three distinct groups of people. You've got developers, miners, and nodes. Developers, pretty self-explanatory. They are, the people who have a very strong knowledge of the Bitcoin code base. They are the people who are technically minded and know how to upgrade the code, can propose different changes to the Bitcoin protocol, and develop the client, so the software that people run to connect to the Bitcoin blockchain. So it's like a group of people that have a very distinct specialized skill set. Miners, very similarly, have a very specialized, distinct sort of characteristics. Miners are people who have a lot of money to spend on machines and can spend a ton of electricity, devoted to mining the Bitcoin blockchain. Not everyone can be a miner. You can't just spin up your computer and be like, oh, I want to mine on the Bitcoin blockchain. No, it's actually very, very, the mining difficulty of Bitcoin right now is extremely high. So miners, it's mainly professional miners as a company, or if you're going to be a mining pool, developing software. These are all very specialized skill sets. There's not a ton of overlap between developers, protocol developers for Bitcoin and miners. And then you get to the third group of people, nodes, that I think is very special in the governance conversation around Bitcoin. Because if you think about it, developers run Bitcoin nodes, miners run Bitcoin nodes. So when we're talking about nodes, who are we really talking about here? And what characteristics define them? The way that I define it is that nodes are basically the users who are not developers and who are not miners who run Bitcoin software, who run Bitcoin clients. So you could think about exchanges, custodians that are all running Bitcoin nodes for different purposes. But the most important type of people in this node bucket are independent users. Just people who don't have a financial incentive to run Bitcoin nodes, but simply want to connect to the Bitcoin blockchain, want to verify the code being run on Bitcoin, want to contribute to the decentralization of Bitcoin, the ethos of Bitcoin. And so to really ensure that this Bitcoin governance triumvirate works, Bitcoin developers have worked very hard to make running Bitcoin nodes extremely easy. That's one of the things that was central to the block size wars, that infamous fork between Bitcoin and Bitcoin Cash. Having bigger blocks would make it more difficult, create a higher barrier to entry for users to run nodes. And that's why, Bitcoin is designed the way that it is. There are certain parts of its protocol that Bitcoin developers are very hesitant about changing. So you can see how the governance of Bitcoin really does also shape the protocol of of Bitcoin, of the way that Bitcoin is developed, and prevent certain changes from getting through. So that's kind of Bitcoin governance in a nutshell. And it's a good starting point to contrast and to highlight how Ethereum governance is extremely different and how that triangle, that setup can't really be applied to Ethereum for several reasons. Ethereum as a technology is very different from Bitcoin. It's a lot more complex. And Ethereum, the ethos is to try and make participating in Ethereum governance as a developer, as a validator, as a node operator, as easy to participate in as possible. And it's really hard kind of to define the characteristics that distinguish these three groups if you try and define it by, what we just talked about, the Bitcoin governance triumvirate. So let me dive a little bit deeper into that and explain a little bit more in detail why it's really hard. So developers. On Ethereum, you have an app layer, which Bitcoin doesn't really have. And so as much as protocol developers do define, how the Ethereum protocol gets changed, a lot of those decisions are informed by application developers, by people who are developing DeFi apps, for people who are developing NFTs. They're the ones who are interacting with the smart contract language Solidity. They're the ones suggesting certain opcodes, different improvements to the EVM. And so you don't have just this specialized set of people who are very familiar with the Ethereum protocol, like the execution layer, the consensus layer, but you've got a ton of people who are just using Ethereum as an application developer, a smart contract coder, that's also influencing decisions heavily. So like the range and the scope of voices is much wider. And then, of course, you don't have miners on Ethereum anymore. You have validators. And if you think about the whole reason why we moved to proof of stake, it's to open up the amount of people who could participate in security, right? You don't have to have a major business or like have a ton of capital to participate in staking. Anyone can be a validator is, supposedly the ethos. But in reality, a lot of the people who are participating in governance in this way by being a validator are actually people who just have some ETH lying around. They don't necessarily have to have 32 ETH. Maybe they just have 2 ETH in their pocket and they want to earn some rewards on it. So when you think about validators and you think about it kind of the way it practically shakes down, you can define it and differentiate it by people who are staking, i.e. just have some ETH lying around that they want yield on, and validator node operators. So the people who are running Ethereum client software for business purposes, to try and make a business out of staking, to take people's ETH, stake it for them, and fulfill the responsibilities of being a validator. So we go now to the final bucket, the nodes, and on Bitcoin, of course, we defined it very clearly as the people who are running nodes independently, not because they're a Bitcoin developer, not because they're a miner, but simply for the purposes of connecting to the Bitcoin blockchains to, contribute to the ethos of decentralization. And we got to ask ourselves, are those primarily the people, if we think about Ethereum, people who are not developers, who are not validator node operators? Is that group of people a very large group of people in Ethereum? And I'd argue, no, not really. Most of the people that are running Ethereum nodes are the validator node operators, or a lot of people who are running nodes are doing it for a business, as a business, to encourage users to connect to their nodes, because running a full node on Ethereum is considerably harder and requires more computational resources. So you have the blockchain infrastructure providers, people like Infura, who are running and operating nodes on users' behalf. So when we're thinking about who's the third arm, if there had to be one, I think it's not as easy to define as just like independent users who are running Ethereum software. You have many businesses that have kind of capitalized on ensuring that it's easy for users to connect to Ethereum, to stake on Ethereum without running their own software, and have and be able to do that service for them. Yes, so this diagram kind of is trying to show that governance on Ethereum is not easy to define in that trilemma sort of way. The next couple slides in this next section of the presentation is the way that I define governance on Ethereum, and the 4 key actors that I think are the most important in Ethereum's governance, and names that as you kind of cover, or as you kind of like continue to follow protocol developments on Ethereum, you'll find these names and these groups of people and their interests popping up frequently. So yes. First and foremost, we have the Ethereum Foundation. The Ethereum Foundation plays a major role in governance, and for different reasons over time. Initially, when the foundation was created, the foundation was allocated a very large portion of Ethereum supply. So of course, that makes this organization extremely important, and it had the responsibility, because Ethereum launched without being like a fully fleshed idea. There were many different milestones that Ethereum had to reach on its roadmap, proof of stake being one of them, that the foundation was meant to help steward, to ensure that that development roadmap got met. So they had this money in the beginning, and so that's why the Ethereum Foundation was very important. It was like the core development house of Ethereum. And you can actually see that same model replicated in many different protocols, right? So there's like the core OP labs. Is there a foundation for Arbitrum? Probably. Is there a foundation for Avalanche? Is there like a core foundation for Solana? When you launch with like a very ambitious development roadmap, there's usually like a central entity that's, trying to pursue it. But over the years, things have changed. Ethereum has grown, and the Ethereum Foundation's role has been to kind of try and reduce its impact on the ecosystem and make sure that the stewardship of the ecosystem is shared by many different people. But to this day, the Ethereum Foundation still plays a really big role in funding a lot of the research that goes into informing different development and protocol decisions that get made. And the Ethereum Foundation continues to house, of course, maintain the most important execution layer client, or the most popular, Geth, and organize things like the ACD calls, which we'll get into in a couple slides. So for many reasons, I think the Ethereum Foundation continues to be a very important player in Ethereum governance, but for different reasons, because now it doesn't have as much ETH supply as it used to. And so now they're important for other reasons than just, they're a huge bag holder, which they're not anymore. And I actually have a report on that. If you're very interested in knowing about supply distribution over time, there's a report on galaxy.com. It's a small plug if you're interested in looking at more data around that. So yes, the first key player, I think, that I want to highlight for Ethereum governance is the Ethereum Foundation. Keep an eye. Keep ticked up. And then client teams, obviously. The people who are building the software for users to connect to Ethereum, there's many. And there's actually a great website, clientdiversity.com, I think, that shows how popular each of these clients are. And they are the developers who maintain and build the software. And one quick thing that I want to mention on this slide is when we're talking about the people who build Ethereum software, it's client teams, and the term Ethereum core developers is not synonymous. You might hear the term Ethereum core developers thrown out a lot, and the definition of that term has also changed over the years. But Ethereum core developers, in my mind at least, defines people who are working on the protocol of Ethereum, not only as a developer for a client team, but perhaps as a researcher. Maybe they're helping out with testing upgrades. Maybe they're EIP editors. So even if they're not part of, one of these client teams, I think you could still attach the term Ethereum core developers. But that term and the definition of Ethereum core developers is a very hotly debated subject in the Ethereum community. So it's not that important, but you might hear it around a lot in discussions about Ethereum governance. So I thought I'd just make a note there. But client teams are very easy to define, and they're really the people who are building either of these protocols. Oh, there's a new one coming out, Reth. Shout out to Rep. They're trying to build, a new Ethereum client. Yes. And then we get into the third group. So who are the people who are actually running that software that those 9 client teams are building, right? Primarily, it's the validator node operators, not the stakers again. It's, the likes of people like Lido, Rocket Pool, Coinbase, Kraken. You got validator node operators. These are the people who are running the software. And I really wish that there was better data to show the types of people running nodes, the number of nodes over time, because this chart is from Ethernodes, and there's really only a handful of sites that are showing this data, and the accuracy around this data is not that great. As you can even see on the text there, that number is just from a random survey that was done by the Ethereum cat herders. They're a project management group in the Ethereum ecosystem, but we don't have time to get into them right now, though they are doing good work. So validator node operators. And when we think about validator node operators, one thing that I want to highlight about them is the likelihood of validator node operators potentially saying no to an upgrade. So let's just say the client teams on the prior side and the Ethereum Foundation was like, hey, here's a new release, like go forth and upgrade. The likelihood of validator node operators resisting that change, I think, the chances of that is getting lower over time, in my mind, for 3 reasons. The first is when we think about the consistency of upgrades that happen on Ethereum, the norm and the idea when I run a node is that on Ethereum, I'm probably going to have to update it in 6 months. That kind of conditioning, so to speak, I think does make the upgrading process a lot easier, and the pushback to upgrades kind of decrease over time. And then you've got, of course, the increasing application layer. You've got tons of applications now that would be irreparably damaged in value if you were to try and resist an upgrade and potentially create a permanent chain split. Things like L2s. You can't have an L2 that wouldn't be impacted by a permanent chain split. That L2 would have to choose which is the real Ethereum. So for, reasons of increasing liquidity and the concerns, the risks of fragmentation of liquidity, but also different types of applications that would be permanently damaged, I think there's lots of good reasons to think about why it's becoming increasingly more hard, the more valuable the apps layer of Ethereum gets, to resist an upgrade or to, rock the boat and cause a permanent chain split. Which might not be a bad thing. And then the third reason, of course, is that who are these validator node operators? A lot of them are businesses, and one of the worst things that you can do for your business is jeopardize the network on which your business is built. So, for many reasons, I think these validator node operators, their incentive and their kind of default mode is to resist any kind of upgrades, code changes that might split the network apart. So that's kind of important to keep in mind in terms of like what's motivating these actors. Of course, it's not going to inform we'll get into it with certain examples of upgrades in the future, but it's important to understand what's motivating these players, and it's important to understand how governance might how contentious governance decisions might be accepted by different groups, how it might be accepted by the Ethereum Foundation versus client teams versus validator node operators. So the last and the fourth team that I want to highlight, group in Ethereum governance that I want to highlight that I think is very important and not talked about enough is dApp developers. dApp developers are a very important group that informs decisions on Ethereum protocol governance. These are 4 examples where dApp developers have just been the key focus of these upgrades. EIP 1153 was primarily, advocated by Uniswap Labs and OP Optimism Labs. And it's because, this upgrade would save their users a lot in gas fees. ERC 4337, not primarily pushed by dApp developers, but the whole idea of it is to service and to increase the adoption of dApps on Ethereum by making it easier for users to interact with dApps and is, attracting a lot of interest from dApps and wallets and other service providers on top of Ethereum. And then you got EIP 7516, which was recently included into the Cancun-Deneb upgrade. And one of the reasons why it was because a developer on top of Ethereum was advocating for it, right? The layer 2 rollups that we're soon going to start to see, blobs on Ethereum. Those developers who are building L2 rollups were like, hey, Ethereum developers, we need this because if you're going to have blobs and if we're going to be able to use those blobs to, service our users cheaper, we're going to need a way to price it and to better, more easily price the user transactions on L2s, then you got to give us this. So another great example of where applications, dApp developers influenced governance, influenced the protocol development of Ethereum. And then finally, self-destruct. Another really great one. Protocol developers are like, we need to get rid of this. Okay, we did this off code is not safe. But it took them forever to get to this stage of like, let's actually deprecate it because they were thinking about the app developers, certain dApps that would be impacted by the removal of this opcode. And how do you ensure that certain dApps that are using that opcode can still, won't be affected, or if they are going to be affected, have a workaround to ensure that their application keeps moving and chugging along. So I actually think dApp developers have a big voice in the Ethereum governance system. Yes, so those are the 4. Now let's talk a little bit about the forums. I'm just going to keep an eye on time. Let's talk about the forums that are very important to Ethereum governance and where the decisions get made, where discussions between these 4 groups really happen. The first and foremost that's most important is probably the ACD calls. That's where a lot of the decisions about Ethereum get made. Or at least communicated on these calls. They happen every week now, and they are frequently attended by EIP authors, client teams, Ethereum Foundation's researchers, Ethereum Foundation researchers, and the cat herders. And it's open for anyone to join. These calls are live streamed on YouTube. But a lot of what gets talked on ACD calls are informed by what's discussed on online forums like ETH Magicians and ETH Research. So, people who are presenting EIPs, talking about what protocol changes should get made on Ethereum, they're first, put up on these forums, and then, they trickle down to the ACD calls. Discord, another very important forum for more day-to-day coordination. I wouldn't say a lot of like long-term objective thinking and planning and decision-making, but Discord is a really great place where developers do like real-time, how is this upgrade going, or like real-time debugging. And it has a ton of different chat rooms where people organize for calls that are not ACD calls, like calls for specifically for EIP 4844, specifically for, Verkle tree development. And fun fact, if you guys know or have used Gitter before, the purpose of Discord, Ethereum developers used to coordinate around Gitter. So what they do on Discord, they used to do on Gitter. But Discord was just a better way to manage multiple chat rooms. And then GitHub is the last forum and is really, I would say, if a decision gets made on ACD and you want to confirm that the decision, like the execution of that decision happened, it happens on GitHub. So like if certain pull requests, issues, decisions about it, what goes into an upgrade, what doesn't, all of that is recorded as kind of like a final step on GitHub, and GitHub does host like the Ethereum specifications, right? Like if you were interested in building an Ethereum client, if you're interested in knowing how Ethereum works, this is kind of like the you're getting it straight from the horse's mouth. And there are talks about moving away from a system like GitHub, because GitHub, the website, is of course centralized, right? So like GitHub as a company could shut down access to their website in certain parts of the world. But that's why developers are encouraged to host localized copies of what they're working on. A lot of processes and decisions on GitHub, of course, are replicated and duplicated in terms of records on Discord, all these other forums. So yeah, governance, forums for people to know. Okay, So past upgrades. Many different upgrades have happened on Ethereum. I'm not going to go through all of these, but I do want to highlight how many there have been and highlight the fact that a lot of what I've been talking about has changed over the years. So when I talk about validator node operators and the fact that these are the people that are running nodes, that's a very recent phenomena. For most of the upgrades, it was miners. Like that, everything that I was talking about in terms of like the interests of validator node operators, that's pretty new stuff, because before we were, as if you were interested in governance, we were talking about what are the interests of miners and how much power do they have over the governance process. Ethereum Foundation, like I said, their importance and their role has changed drastically from the beginning of Ethereum to now. So with this slide, I just want to highlight that with every single upgrade that has happened on Ethereum, governance on Ethereum has changed. And governance on Ethereum is likely to continue to change as the protocol of Ethereum gets changed. Imagine what happens if, Ethereum does achieve its dream by being a completely like DA layer. Most of the application activity happens on L2s. Imagine the governance, how governance might change. Like maybe another fifth group that starts to grow in popularity and importance and size is really the L2s, or like L2 foundations. But anyways, that's getting ahead of myself. So let's end off this presentation and talk in the last couple minutes about the future upgrades. Cancun-Deneb, it's coming, guys. Cancun-Deneb, probably not likely for this year, but possibly for next year. Who knows? Obviously, it's a little too early to say because we're still in the midst of, developers are still in the midst of testing the upgrade. But the reason why I am a little hesitant about saying that Cancun-Deneb might happen this year is because of the last minute addition of two EIPs. They're the ones underlined. And we already talked about the block base fee, why that was included, and the role, of course, that L2 developers really had in pushing that through. I want to talk very quickly about EIP 7514. It's to address the issue of validator set size growth, important issue. And when the decision was made, there was some concern among the Ethereum community, shown on Twitter and other forums, that actually we didn't talk about Twitter, but anyways, that look, the decision was made very hastily. That I don't agree that this is as pressing an issue as you say, and maybe we shouldn't include EIP 7154. But EIP 7154, the solution that it gives to the issue of validator set size growth is a short-term solution. There are other proposals that are trying to address that issue with more radical changes to validator economics and network monetary policy. And so one of the things I really want to do right now is just to make a call out to people who are interested in Ethereum governance and to just Ethereum stakeholders in general, that this conversation around how do we address validator set size growth is not one that ends with EIP 7514, and that it's important for Ethereum stakeholders to consider what are some of the other proposals that are being considered to address this issue, because it is going to have major ramifications on the network. And we can't have another I didn't know this was an issue, or kind of like after the fact the decision has been made, being surprised at kind of the results of how governance was done and how consensus came to be. So EIP 7514, kind of a very recent, I shouldn't say unique, it's a very recent example of where I think governance happened primarily by developers, but there was such an opportunity, and there still remains a really big opportunity for other people to enter into this discussion and to, make their voices heard about how validator economics and network monetary policy should change moving forward. So Cancun-Deneb coming up. Prague-Electra is the name of the upgrade, supposed name of the upgrade for the next one after Cancun-Deneb. And there's a question, which upgrade is going to be in the driver's seat of Prague and Electra? It's not going to be like all of these all at once, because a very recent trend now in the way upgrades are created on Ethereum is by having just one big code change and several smaller ones. So for Cancun-Deneb, the biggest code change going into Cancun-Deneb, the one requiring the most amount of testing, is EIP 4844. Shanghai, the biggest one was obviously the state ETH withdrawals. Merge, it was the transition to proof of stake. So Prague-Electra, who's going to be in the driver's seat? There's so many different priorities that people are going to be lobbying for. Is it really to address the issue of validator set size growth? Is that the code change that needs to be the main one in Prague-Electra? Is it the major overhaul to the EVM with the big EOF upgrade? Is it a change to the way that Ethereum stores state with Verkle trees? Who knows? It's going to be a contentious, heated topic. And for it to come out to the outcome that I think will reflect the most robust and resilient governance system that Ethereum has, we need the voices of many different stakeholders to participate. So making another shout out for Prague-Electra and for the discussions around that, that I think people should really participate in and make their voices heard in. And I didn't get really into the technical, the increasing complexity of Ethereum as Ethereum upgrades more and more. But one thing to note, as I kind of started off this slide about timing, is that the more upgrades we do and the more complex Ethereum becomes, the longer it's going to take to test these upgrades, because there's a higher technical risk. There's a higher amount of probability for bugs the more complex your code base gets, which means testing is going to take longer. And so as we think about how upgrades might get slower for good reason, each one is going to hold more and more importance because of how much effort and time and cost goes into it. Anyways, so thank you. Thank you so much for listening. And if you have any questions, I'll be just out there.